The great Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in 1947. And of course, the Jackie Robinson Training Complex named in his honor for his legacy. And that legacy gets to live on here in Dodgertown and beyond in Major League Baseball. And now we're getting to be joined in the booth by the great Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City. We are so graced by your presence. Thank you for coming to join us on the broadcast.
Oh, man, it's great to see you both. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, one thing that stood out so much about what you do and your presence with the Negro League Baseball Museum is the way that you resonate with the young people. We had some players that were in the Hank Aaron Invitational that said, Mr. Kendrick doesn't only bring the stories that, hey, you can research on the internet, so yeah, maybe you can look them up, but no, he brings those stories to life in such an amazing way. So tell me what it really is like to be such a great storyteller for all these wonderful stories throughout American history.
Well, you know, now that I seemingly have earned that reputation as a great storyteller, I think the greatest compliment that we could ever receive is someone saying, I felt like I was there. You know, when you paint a picture that is so vivid, you know, they feel like they were there. They're watching Satchel face Josh Gibson, or they're witnessing the speed of cool Papa Bell. And that makes you feel good, because that's what we want. We want people to feel what this history was all about.
Love that. And to me, I look at, you know, all the things, all the initiatives that Major League Baseball has done to put things in place, like the Andre Dawson Classic, and how special it is for these players, but what does it mean for them to be on the grounds of where Jackie Robinson had played?
I hope it's not lost on them, because every time that I step on these, and I refer to them as hallowed grounds, I feel the spirit and certainly have an understanding as a steward of the story what this complex meant, because this was Branch Rickey's safe haven for those African-American players, those early African-American players, not just Jackie, but Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, Junior Gilliam, the list goes on and on. And I hope that the young athletes, when they are here, that they too understand how special this place really was, and still is.
Still is in many ways. One thing that's great that you do with the Negro League Baseball Museum is the many different ways that you reach out, not only with the YouTube series, The Undeniable, which if you haven't watched that, definitely watch it. You're missing out if you haven't already. But also the video game. Of course, MLB The Show 24 has a lot of focus on the Negro Leagues and who's there telling all the history and everything like that. Mr. Bob Kendrick is the whole time as well. But with the Undeniable series, one episode that stood out was your story on the women of the Negro Leagues. And after learning about Mamie Peanut Johnson and what she did in her career, you talked about how the Negro Leagues embodies the American spirit more than any story in American history, in your opinion. Can you describe what that American spirit is, especially in relevance to the Negro Leagues?
Yeah, no, I truly believe that, because they didn't care what color you were, and they didn't care what gender you were. All that mattered to those in the Negro Leagues was, can you play? And if you can play, you can play. And that's why I think it does embody the American spirit. And I think it's what is captured when people make their way to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. You come in and you're going to learn a very precious piece of baseball in Americana. You're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform. But you leave there cheering the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. And to me, that is what makes Negro Leagues baseball history so incredibly special, so endearing, so compelling, so awe-inspiring.
Well, what I think I appreciate most is that the Negro Leagues Museum is always continuing to evolve, right? There's always new things coming out, and I'm wondering, what are some of the priorities now for you continuing to move forward and make those, not necessarily changes, but the things that people can look forward to?
Well, and I think as a museum, as a history museum, and even more so a cultural institution, the challenge is, how do you make this history relevant? How do you make it relevant to an ever-changing generation of young people? Negro Leagues baseball hadn't been played in 6 decades, yet the life lessons that stem from this story are as meaningful today as ever before. And so it meant creating an animated series such as Undeniable. The first time that Major League Baseball had done an animated series, and they chose to do it with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, which we are inherently proud of partnering with MLB to produce what has been a groundbreaking series, a 3 mini animated series features, and people have really grabbed hold, and the young kids have grabbed hold to it. Nothing has been bigger, however, than the inclusion of the Negro Leagues in MLB The Show. We debuted the Negro Leagues in MLB The Show in 2023. And it has by far been one of the biggest things that the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum has ever done. I think I was a little naive because I didn't realize how big the gaming platform really is.
It is huge.
It is huge. And as a result, millions upon millions of young folks and young adults are not only learning about the Negro Leagues, but guys, they're falling in love with the Negro Leagues because Sony was very smart not to just throw the players in and throw stats in with no context.
Right.
They wanted to make sure that the gamer had every opportunity to learn the backstory about these players. And for me, if anyone deserved to be in a video game, it would be the players from the Negro Leagues. I mean, the swagger of Satchel Paige,
right,
the mythical-like power of Josh Gibson. And so it was a perfect fit, and they get to learn these stories. Now, I never dreamt that I would be in a video game. I'm in the game telling these stories.
And the brakes are put on there by Matthew Perez. That loads up the bases for Florida A&M, kind of reflecting the loaded bases that Missouri had earlier in the frame. Florida A&M was able to get out of it on the mound. Now it's Missouri's turn to see if they can get out of this sequence. Of course, we're joined up here by Bob Kendrick on the mound. One huge thing about the Swingman Classic, it's getting a chance to showcase the HBCUs. And here in the Andre Dawson Classic, also 7 out of the 8 teams that are being showcased here are HBCUs. So going back to the time of the Negro Leagues, how big of a role did the HBCUs have in the community and also in being able to produce talent and educate everybody in that time?
Oh, it played a tremendous role, and there's a tremendous connection between the Negro Leagues and historically black colleges and universities. There's this misnomer that these players from the Negro Leagues were vagabonds, tramps, hobos, illiterate. That is not true. Over 40% of the athletes that played in the Negro Leagues had some level of college education. Actually, less than 5% of those who played in the major leagues at that same time had any college education, for the simple reason that the major leagues then didn't want you to go to college. They got you out of high school, put you in the farm system, and then you work your way to the big leagues. Well, the Negro Leagues didn't have that kind of sophisticated farm system. So what did we do? We trained on the campuses of HBCUs. They would play the black college baseball teams and then would recruit a great deal of their workforce from those HBCUs. And so there's a tremendous connection there. They served in its own way as a farm system for the Negro Leagues.
Love that. That is awesome to be able to see that sort of connection. And it kind of reflects a conversation we had earlier with Roger Cador, where his first season at Southern, he brought all of his group, all of his players. They went and they took on Dusty Baker's Atlanta Braves squad to get some of that experience, get some of that training. So I feel like that's a modern day, or a little more modern day reflection of what happened in the past in the Negro Leagues. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, you had a lot of players who would go to college. They would play in the Negro Leagues to earn their tuition. I like to tell the story of a player named Grady Orange. Grady Orange played in the Negro Leagues so that he could finance his tuition so that he could go to school at Meharry Medical College and become a medical doctor. So that's the caliber of not only athlete but man that played in the Negro Leagues, and it's all about setting the record straight. You know, we have these misnomers and these stereotypical depictions of what these athletes were like, and we're very proud to help set the record straight there at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Bob, let me ask you a little bit about the process of deciding which stories to tell, right? Yeah. Which ones that you end up having be priorities, and how do you go about figuring out which ones are important to the Negro Leagues Museum?
Well, you know, I think for us, we try and look at every single aspect of these leagues. For me, it's almost a given that when you walk through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform. And we almost de-emphasize the athletes in lieu of the story, because it really was the story that had escaped us. It's not in the pages of American history books. Thus, countless generations of us went through our own formal education not knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history. And so for me, I became fascinated by the off-the-field impact of the Negro Leagues. Third largest black-owned business in this country. And wherever you had successful black baseball, you typically had thriving black economies. And so that's the side of the story that is oftentimes overlooked. And I can understand why, because it's so easy to fall in love with the romantic nature of these very courageous athletes who overcame tremendous social adversity to play the game that they love. That we lose sight of the business aspect of what Negro Leagues baseball also represented.
Bottom of the 7th inning, bases loaded right now for Florida A&M, and the run that would put them ahead, the go-ahead run, is just 90 feet away right now for Florida A&M, trying to take their first lead of the game against Missouri. And we are joined, of course, by Bob Kendrick up here in the broadcast booth. And it's great hearing all the different stories that you have and being able to see what the players in the Hank Aaron Invitational thought about it. I already told you about bringing the stories to life, but also there were players that were talking about how important it is to be able to have this history. And if we can retain that ourselves, we can be able to tell it to the next generation and keep that going. And I feel the MLB's done a great job of being able to lift that up and continue bringing that into the limelight. We think about the Rickwood game, as well as, of course, the stats from the Negro Leagues being brought into the full database of the stats in Major League Baseball. Two huge moments that have happened over the last year.
No, we've had some amazing milestones over the last several years. I think Negro Leagues baseball right now is as hot as it has ever been, due in large part to the things that you just mentioned. You know, getting the stats into the record books of Major League Baseball was tremendous. Yeah, it was a watershed moment, not just for black baseball history, but for American history.
So Missouri strands the bases loaded, kind of reflects some things, as we got to have some reflections here from Bob Kendrick up in the booth. Thank you so much for joining us up here.
Hey guys, it's great to see you folks. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.